My parents stole my savings to pay off my brother's debt while calling me ungrateful, so I cut ties completely, and now they're desperate for my help. I'm a 27-year-old guy, and for as long as I can remember, responsibility wasn't something I earned respect for, it was something shoved onto me like a weight I was supposed to carry without complaint. Growing up, it felt like every adult in my family looked at me and saw a miniature version of the man they wished my father had been: steady, reliable, emotionless. Meanwhile, my younger brother, Mason, was treated like some fragile treasure that would shatter if anyone so much as raised their voice at him. I used to watch him breeze through life, failing tests, losing money, making terrible choices, and still being called just a kid who needs guidance. Hearing that while I was the same age, or sometimes younger, made something tighten in my chest every single time. I remember being 13 and overhearing my mom say, "At least he knows how to handle things," her voice drifting from the kitchen like a verdict. From that moment, chores, bills, errands, and every emotionally heavy situation magically became my job. Talk to your father, he listens to you. Help Mason study, he gets nervous with pressure. Can you cover the electricity bill until next month? Those sentences became the soundtrack of my teenage years. By 16, I was working part-time after school, coming home smelling like fryer oil and exhaustion, telling myself I was doing it to build my own life someday. I didn't trust my parents with my future, so I became my own safety net long before I should have needed one. Every spare dollar went into a quiet savings account, my only secret, my only protection. I thought that money symbolized freedom. I didn't know it would one day become the very thing my family felt owed to them just because I had it. And that realization was only the beginning. Mason's mistakes didn't start suddenly, they just slowly got bigger, louder, and harder to hide. By the time he was 17, he had already borrowed money from half our relatives, wrecked his first used car, and dropped out of 2 community college programs without finishing a single semester. Every time something blew up, my parents would gather in the living room, their voices trembling with worry, not anger. "He's just stressed," my mom would whisper, her fingers pressed against her forehead. "Your brother's trying his best," my dad would mutter, even when Mason didn't look like he was trying at all. And somehow, those words always turned into expectations for me. I remember one night when Mason came home with red eyes and trembling hands, slamming his backpack on the floor. My mom immediately rushed to him, her voice softening, asking, "Honey, what happened?" Mason didn't hesitate, he pointed at me and snapped, "He wouldn't help me study. How am I supposed to pass anything without support?" I just stood there, tired from an 8-hour shift after school, still smelling like dish soap and fryer grease. My parents turned to me like I had personally sabotaged his future. "Why can't you just be more patient with him?" my dad said quietly, his disappointment sharper than a shout. What crushed me most wasn't Mason's dependency, it was how naturally my parents assumed my stability existed for him to lean on. They treated his laziness as sensitivity, his irresponsibility as fragility, and my exhaustion as duty. I started recognizing the pattern. Mason didn't need to grow up because everyone around him was cushioning every fall he created. And the more they protected him, the more invisible I felt. Still, I kept saving, kept working, kept believing that if I built a solid enough future for myself, their chaos couldn't reach me. I didn't realize yet that chaos doesn't stay contained, it spills, and soon, it would spill directly into the one thing I thought they couldn't touch. By the time I turned 24, my savings had finally reached a point where buying a modest apartment didn't feel like a distant dream anymore. I remember sitting alone in my tiny rented room, laptop open, scrolling through real estate listings with a kind of quiet pride I had never felt growing up. The glow of the screen lit up the walls, and for a moment, the life I imagined, peaceful, stable, mine, felt almost close enough to touch. I didn't tell my parents the exact number I had saved, but they knew I had been putting money away for years. Whenever the topic came up, their reactions always had a strange edge to them, like admiration mixed with something else, something hungry. But I brushed it off, convincing myself I was imagining it. One afternoon, while we were all sitting at the dining table, my mom casually said, "You know, family helps family. That's what makes us strong." Her tone was soft, but the way she looked at me made my stomach tighten. My dad chimed in, "You've always been blessed with discipline. Not everyone has that." I could tell they weren't just complimenting me, they were circling something, testing the ground. Mason looked up from his phone just long enough to smirk, as if he already knew where the conversation was heading. I tried to redirect things, laughing lightly. "My savings are for my future. I'm finally close to getting out of this place." But my mom's smile didn't reach her eyes. "Well, sometimes life chooses for you," she murmured, and the room fell into an uncomfortable silence. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, feeling a strange heat spread through my chest, a warning I didn't fully understand yet. I kept telling myself I was overthinking, that my parents respected boundaries, that my hard-earned money was safe. I didn't realize then that they had already decided otherwise. And the plan they were quietly forming would shatter everything I thought I had secured. The explosion started on a Tuesday evening, right after I got off work and was still sitting in my car, letting the engine hum beneath me as I tried to unwind. My phone buzzed nonstop, 3 missed calls from my mom, 2 frantic texts from my dad, all saying, "Call us now." The moment I answered, my mom's panicked voice rushed into my ear like a wave. "It's Mason," she cried. "He's in trouble again. He needs help. Please come home." I pulled into their driveway with my heart pounding, already knowing deep down that this wasn't going to be something small. Inside, the air felt thick, like everyone had been holding their breath for hours. My dad stood by the kitchen counter, his hands pressed flat against the surface as if holding himself upright. Mason sat slumped on the couch, face pale, bouncing his leg anxiously. When I asked what happened, he muttered, "It's not my fault," before my dad cut in sharply. "He took a private loan," he said, voice strained. "A big one. And he's months behind on payments." My mom added, "They're threatening legal action, they even came to our door." I remember staring at Mason, waiting for him to meet my eyes, but he didn't. He just whispered, "I didn't know it'd get this bad," like he expected that to excuse everything. My mom turned to me, eyes wide and pleading. "We need you to step in. Just this once. You're the only one who can help." I felt the room closing in, the lights suddenly too bright, the air too warm. "No," I said quietly. "I can't fix this. I won't." My dad's expression hardened instantly. "So you're just going to abandon your family?" he snapped. Their shock, like my boundary was betrayal, hit me harder than the request itself. And I didn't know it yet, but their desperation had already pushed them past the line they could never uncross. 2 days after that confrontation, I was getting ready for work when I opened my banking app out of habit, expecting to see the same number I'd been protecting for years. Instead, my phone screen blurred as I stared at a balance so low it felt like the ground shifted under me. For a moment, I genuinely thought it was a glitch. I closed the app, reopened it, refreshed it, again and again, but the truth sat there, cold and unchanging. My entire savings, every hour, every shift, every sacrifice, was gone. Completely drained in one transaction I never authorized. My hands shook as I scrolled through the details. The withdrawal wasn't random. It was done through an old linked authorization method I'd set up years ago, one only my parents had ever been given access to. The air around me felt tight, like I couldn't pull in a full breath. I called my mother instantly, the phone nearly slipping from my sweaty hands. When she answered, her voice was calm, too calm. "Oh, you saw it," she said, as if I had simply noticed a package on the porch. "What did you do?" I rasped, pacing my apartment as heat crawled up my spine. She sighed, like I was the inconvenience. "We had no choice. Your brother needed help. You're young, you can save it again." My dad's voice cut in from the background, sharper, "Stop being dramatic. It's just money. Family sacrifices. Just money?" I choked out, feeling my throat burn. That was my future. That was everything I worked for. But my mom responded with a quiet, dismissive, "You should be grateful we trusted you to rebuild. Mason needed you more." It hit me then, not just the theft, but the entitlement. They didn't feel guilty. They felt justified. and that cold realization changed something in me I couldn't undo. But the worst part? I had no idea this was only the beginning of what they'd taken. I drove straight to my parents' house that evening, the steering wheel slick under my palms because I couldn't stop sweating or shaking. When I stormed inside, the air felt heavy with the smell of cooked onions and something burning on the stove, like the house itself was pretending life was normal. My parents looked up with a mix of annoyance and false innocence, but Mason looked terrified. "Why did you take my savings?" I demanded, my voice cracking even though I tried to keep it steady. My mom stood up slowly, her expression soft, patronizing. "Sweetheart, we told you, we had no choice. The lender was dangerous." But before I could respond, Mason blurted out, "They weren't dangerous." The room froze. My dad snapped, "Mason, shut up," but the damage was already done. I turned to him, my chest tightening. "What do you mean not dangerous?" His eyes darted across the room like a trapped animal before he whispered, "It wasn't some loan shark. It was gambling. I racked up credit at the casino. I thought I could win it back." The words punched the air out of me. "Gambling?" I repeated, barely recognizing my own voice. My mom panicked, rushing toward him. "He didn't mean it like that, he's just stressed." My dad barked, "We didn't tell you because you judge him. You always judge him." I stared at them, stunned. "So you lied to me," I said slowly. "You manipulated me into thinking you were in danger, just to cover up his addiction?" My mom folded her arms defensively. "We protected the family. That's what parents do." Mason muttered, "I'm sorry," but it sounded like a rehearsed line, not remorse. In that moment, something inside me snapped, not loudly, but quietly, like a rope finally fraying apart after years of weight. And I realized this wasn't just betrayal, it was a pattern designed to break me. But I didn't know yet how much lower they'd drag me before I finally walked away. I left their house that night feeling like my body was moving but my mind was stuck, floating somewhere above me, replaying every word they'd said. The cold air outside hit my face like a slap, but it did nothing to steady the shaking in my hands. I sat in my car for a long time, staring at the steering wheel, listening to the faint hum of traffic in the distance, wondering how the people who raised me could twist my life into something so unrecognizable. Eventually, the numbness turned into a burn, slow, rising, undeniable. So I walked back inside, not to negotiate, not to reason, but to finally speak the truth I'd swallowed my entire life. They were still in the living room, voices low, Mason avoiding eye contact. "I'm done," I said quietly, my voice sounding eerily calm. My mom scoffed like I was throwing a tantrum. "Don't be dramatic," she said, waving her hand. "Families go through hard times." My dad's eyes narrowed. "You think walking out makes you better than us?" Mason finally looked at me and muttered, "You're really leaving over money?" That word, money, snapped something sharp inside me. "This isn't about money," I said, stepping forward. "It's about you using me. Lying to me. Treating me like a safety net instead of a son." My mom shook her head. "We've sacrificed for you your whole life." I laughed, actually laughed, because for the first time, I heard the absurdity instead of absorbing it. "Sacrifice?" I whispered. "You stole from me, and you still think you're owed something." I told them I was cutting contact. No visits. No favors. No more being the foundation they stood on while kicking me lower. My mom's face twisted in disbelief, my dad muttered a curse, and Mason just stared like I'd betrayed him. But as I walked out the door for the last time, I didn't feel free. I felt the terrifying realization that without me, their chaos was about to spiral, and somehow, I knew they would blame me for every second of it. It didn't take long for the fallout to begin, though I tried desperately not to watch it happen. A few weeks after I cut ties, my aunt called me out of the blue, her voice trembling the way someone sounds when they're afraid to deliver bad news. "Things are bad over there," she whispered, as if speaking too loudly would make it worse. She told me the debt collectors weren't going away, if anything, they'd become more aggressive now that Mason had defaulted again. They were calling non-stop, showing up at the door, threatening legal steps my parents were completely unprepared for. Hearing it made my stomach twist, but underneath the guilt was something else, a deep, exhausted recognition that this spiral had been inevitable. I started hearing more pieces from relatives who had always stayed neutral before. My parents were months behind on utilities. The mortgage was late. Mason had maxed out 2 more credit cards in the weeks after I left, as if the lack of my support pushed him into complete freefall. "Your mother is crying every day," my aunt said softly. "Your father looks 10 years older." I sat there, gripping my phone so tightly my knuckles whitened. Part of me wanted to drive over and fix everything like I always had. But another part, the part that had been stepped on for years, felt frozen, paralyzed by the memory of how easily they justified stealing my future. Then came the real blow. Mason started telling people I abandoned them in a family crisis. He told neighbors I refused to help even though they were in danger, twisting the story so perfectly it made him look like the victim. A couple of childhood friends even messaged me asking why I was being cold. I realized then that walking away hadn't just separated me from their chaos, it had made me the villain in the narrative they crafted. And that realization cut deeper than any financial loss ever could. But the worst part was still coming, because their desperation wasn't anywhere near its peak yet. About a month after everything blew up, I woke up to an email so long it took several swipes just to reach the end. The subject line read, "We need to talk as a family," which already made my stomach knot. I sat on the edge of my bed, the early morning light spilling through the blinds in thin, sharp lines, and opened it with a heaviness I couldn't shake. The first paragraph looked like an apology, but the tone was off, too polished, too rehearsed, like they were performing empathy rather than feeling it. "We're sorry you feel hurt," my mom wrote, which wasn't an apology for what they did, just a subtle way of blaming me for reacting. Then she added, "We only did what any loving parents would do in a crisis," and the familiar burn of anger flared up behind my ribs. My dad chimed in halfway through, writing, "You have always been strong. We believed you could rebuild. We're a family, we share burdens." I muttered out loud, "You didn't share the burden, you dumped it on me," the words tasting bitter. They ended the email with a plea, "Please come home so we can talk face to face. Your brother needs support more than ever." That line made me shut my laptop instantly, like I'd touched something hot. Of course it wasn't about reconciliation, it was about what I could give. As if on cue, Mason sent a text a few hours later, "I'm trying to do better. Can you please just talk to us?" I stared at the message, feeling nothing. No anger, no sadness, just emptiness. His next text came 5 minutes later, "You're punishing me." Why? That one stung more than I expected, not because it was true, but because he genuinely didn't understand the damage he'd caused. I realized then that they didn't miss me. They missed the version of me who fixed everything. And deep down, I could feel it, they were already preparing their next attempt to pull me back in. I agreed to meet them only because I needed closure, my own peace, not theirs, but the entire drive to the cafe felt like my chest was being squeezed in a slow, deliberate fist. The winter air outside bit at my skin as I walked in, and for a second, the smell of burnt espresso and pine-scented candles grounded me. They were already sitting at a table near the window, my mom waving stiffly, my dad staring like he was preparing for a court hearing. Mason was slumped in his seat, hood up, eyes bouncing everywhere except toward me. I sat down, steadying my breathing, rehearsing the boundary I had repeated in my head 1,000 times. But the moment I opened my mouth, my mom jumped in first. "We're glad you came," she said quickly, her voice syrupy sweet in a way that made my stomach twist. "We need to move past this. Family bonds should matter more than money." My dad nodded, adding, "You've punished us long enough. It's time to let it go." I felt the heat rise in my face, not from anger at that moment, but from the sheer disbelief. "You stole my savings," I said quietly. "And you lied to me. I'm not here to pretend that didn't happen." My mom's smile faltered. "We did what we had to do," she snapped, her sweetness evaporating instantly. Mason finally looked up and muttered, "You're ruining everything. You walked out on us." I turned to him, the words heavy. I walked away from being abused. There's a difference. My dad slammed his palm lightly on the table. You think you're better than us now? He barked. For the first time in my life, I didn't shrink. I didn't apologize. I didn't try to fix the emotional storm swirling around me. I simply stood up and said, I'm not your solution anymore. As I walked out, their voices tangled behind me, anger, disbelief, desperation, all fading into the cold air outside. But I knew they weren't done trying to pull me back, not yet. In the months after that confrontation, something inside me finally settled, slowly, quietly, like dust drifting to the floor after a storm. I threw myself into work, not out of desperation this time, but because building my life felt like reclaiming something they had tried to take from me. My new apartment wasn't fancy, but every corner smelled like fresh paint and possibility, and the first night I slept there, the silence felt like a luxury I had never known. I stopped checking my phone for their messages, stopped waiting for the guilt to pull me back, stopped carrying the invisible weight of being their fixer. Every paycheck I saved felt different, lighter, freer, like the money finally belonged to my future instead of their emergencies. And with each passing week, the version of me they depended on began to fade. Still, the ripple effects found their way to me through relatives. They're struggling without you, my aunt told me over the phone one afternoon. Your mother says they didn't realize how much they leaned on you. I just let out a quiet breath and stared at the steam rising from my mug. That's the point, I said softly. A part of me expected to feel triumphant, but instead I felt something more complicated, relief laced with sadness I didn't want to admit. My aunt hesitated before adding, they're asking people what they can do to get you back. I didn't answer that. I didn't know how to. But I knew I wasn't going back, not to the chaos, not to the manipulation, not to being the safety net they pretended was love. Then, out of nowhere, I got a text from an unknown number. We really need to talk. There's something you should know. My chest tightened as I stared at it, recognizing the writing style instantly. It wasn't Mason. It was my dad. And whatever he wanted to say, felt like it was going to change everything again. When I finally answered my dad's message 2 days later, it wasn't because I wanted reconciliation, I just needed to know what new disaster they were dragging behind them. We agreed to meet at a small park near my apartment, the kind with crooked benches and trees that creaked softly when the wind pushed through their branches. I saw him sitting alone, shoulders slumped, looking older than I had ever seen him. For a second, guilt pricked the edge of my mind, but then I remembered all the years they had taken pieces of me without hesitation. I approached cautiously, keeping enough distance to protect whatever peace I had built. He looked up when he heard my footsteps, his breath fogging in the cold air. We messed up, he said immediately, the words clumsy and stiff, like he didn't quite know how to form them. Your mother. Mason, we all did. His voice cracked slightly, and for a moment he looked human, not the man who once told me I was selfish for keeping my own money. We thought we were doing what was right. We didn't realize we were choosing him over you. I let out a slow breath, watching it drift upward like a thin ghost of everything I'd carried. You didn't just choose him, I said quietly. You used me. You expected me to sacrifice because it was convenient. He nodded, staring at the ground. Mason's in trouble again. Worse trouble. And we can't fix it. I felt the familiar tug, the instinct to step in, to save, to fix. But it dissolved just as quickly. I'm sorry, I told him, and for the first time, I meant it, not as an apology, but as a boundary. But his life is his responsibility. Not mine. Not anymore. He didn't argue. He just looked defeated, like the truth finally landed where it should have years ago. As I walked away, the cold wind wrapped around me, but for once, it didn't sting. It felt clean. Final. And for the first time in my life, choosing myself didn't feel selfish, it felt like freedom.